Ah, the tangled webs we weave.
What's going on, y'all? It's David or David, and we are back with another Borderlands 3 character build video for y'all. Today's build guide is going to be on my ThunderFrost Amara build, meant for the Malawan takedown that I've been using with a couple other friends, and it's been working wonders against all the shield and armored enemies in the takedown. The main focus of this build is to inflict shock damage for the shield and cryo damage for the armor on enemies, as well as applying cryo to CC and freeze the enemies. If you like this build, please make sure to drop me a like and to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate the heck out of each and every one of you just taking the time to even watch this. If you leave me a comment, I'll also make sure that I reply to every single one of you awesome people. So, kicking off the build, I'll go over the skill tree first and explain briefly why I chose each skill, as well as covering other viable options when necessary if you want to take the build in another direction but still keep the core of it the same. After putting it all in the points, I like to cover possible choices for action skill and action skill augments. First, we can start in the Fist of the Elements tree to pick up our core damage skills. I like to put 5 points into Anima to elongate the time of cryo staying on the enemies to increase the chances of freezing them. Next, I like to max out Tempest because this skill is just too good to pass up on for any elemental damage Amara build. The extra shock damage bonus here is really great because our main weapon is going to be the Brainstormer shotgun, which I'll touch on a bit later in this video. While we are on the tier 2 skills, I also like to max out Wildfire to increase the chances of electrocute and cryo status effects spreading to nearby enemies. This just helps increase our DPS really. Next, I always put a point into Dread because the gun damage it gives you with a grass build, along with the reloading aspect of the skill, is incredibly good for utility to have. On tier 4, I think that Deepwell is a staple for a build using any elemental weapon because it increases your magazine size, which equates to more damage really, and it also works in cohesion with terror ammo regen combos because the higher your magazine is, the quicker your ammo will regenerate directly to your magazine. Also on tier 4, I fill up Catharsis because the explosion that it causes works really well against mobs and can really help you if you're in a bad spot. Alternatively, you can instead use these 3 points to max out Indiscriminate to ricochet bullets to other enemies. Depending on what weapon you have, this skill could prove to be way more useful. After that, I fill up Sustainment all the way because the enemies of this raid are not shy at all about shooting you, especially in Mayhem 4. Sustainment just helps you really keep your HP at a comfortable amount as long as you're dishing out elemental damage. And lastly, on this side of the skill tree, I put that final point into Forceful Expression because it simply just gives you a really good bonus elemental damage, which this build honestly really appreciates because we're trying to get as much elemental damage as possible. We can now head on over to the Mystical Assault side of the tree and put in our final points, starting with 3 points into Fast Hands. This reload speed is really nice if I choose not to run a Terra set, but I mainly just use this for the weapon swap speed bonus. It's really just like a quality of life, just being able to swap to the correct element gun when fighting, and it just helps your runs go a lot smoother. Next, I like to max out Violent Tapestry because 1, I gain rush stacks from applying status effects, and 2, to gain increased chance of applying of status effects from our rush stacks. This just overall helps with our goal to apply shock and cryo to as many enemies as possible, as efficiently as possible. We can also go back and put 1 point into Do Harm that we'll need later on to get down the tree further. Do Harm just enables us another method of gaining rush stacks to later on consume. On tier 2, for just all of my Amara builds pretty much, I max out Restless because this skill cooldown rate is just so good. It helps your damage output, it helps keep you safe, it helps giving you more reloads with the Dread skill, and it helps you apply your status effects to the enemies. It's really just an all-around efficient skill. And next on tier 3, I like to put the point here into Ascendant because it only costs a single point and it just gives you some really helpful bonuses to your augment, which I'll cover in just a sec. The 4th tier of skills is really flexible. They're all very useful in their own regard. For this build, I like maxing out Laid Bare. The increased damage is applied from all sources, so teammates can deal extra damage from your skill as well. I also like putting 3 points into Wrath for even more gun damage once I activate my action skill. From Rest is really good if you're using a Malawan weapon because the charge time decrease that it gives you is super crazy. I'm pretty sure it's above 50%. My final point I put into Remnant because the ball of energy that emerges is a very useful source of cheap damage, but an argument can also easily be made for Awakening because it buffs the effectiveness of our rush stacks. So for the action skill and the augments, I think that Ties That Bind is generally a very useful action skill for mobbing. It gives you very good damage output on a rather low cooldown. I use this with Stillness of Mind because the CC that they provide together is incredibly useful to slow down and control the tide of battle. Soul Sap can be used if sustainment is not healing enough for you, and Allure can be used for splash damage weapon usage. Fist Over Matter is a good alternative to Ties That Bind if you are focusing more on an action skill build, and phase cast skills can be even used if you're favoring a phase cast anointed weapon. For the element, I generally just go with Shock here because Tempest provides the best boost to shock damage, and for this specific takedown, there are very few flesh enemies to warrant using the Incendiary element. Moving on to the gear finally, we can start off with a main source of DPS for this build, which is the Brainstormer shotgun that has the anointment of, when terrified, gain plus 50% cryo damage. This is what the build is mainly built around. Our goal is to group enemies up and ties that bind them together, and then smack them with the Brainstormer to melt them all down while freezing the ones that aren't quite dead yet. With this gun, it is very important that at least 2 enemies are together, because if just shot at an enemy alone, it does very underwhelming damage. Also, the cryo effect on this gun can apply cryo to enemies and in turn freeze them, but the effect is a lot smaller if the enemy is alone. I want to go over the artifact that I chose next because it ties in very well with the specific Brainstormer, and that is the Icebreaker Cosmic Crater. This works together with my Brainstormer because it has the ability that increases damage to frozen targets, as well as the bonuses of increased cryo damage and increased action skill cooldown rate. These bonuses really aid our DPS and help us get our phase grasp back as quickly as possible. And now back to the weapons. Since the Brainstormer was our main weapon and had the shock and cryo elements, I wanted to bring with me some supporting guns that had corrosive and incendiary to balance it out and cover my weaknesses. So I brought both a corrosive and a fire cutsman that both have the anointed extra status effect chance and damage on action skill end. These two came out for when I really needed to melt down an armored enemy or a flesh enemy really quickly, and they got the job done pretty much. The corrosive one specifically is the unsung hero of this build because it completely shreds the final boss and the Valkyries like paper. These two were also really helpful for when the enemy ended up alone and the Brainstormer just wasn't really cutting it. For my shield and grenade mods, I used a very common Terra combo to ensure that I almost never had to reload my Brainstormer and that my Cutsmans had the largest mag as possible. My shield I used in this run was the improved Bullet Buffet shield because at the time of recording it was the only ammo regen shield I had, but even though it was only purple, it really did the trick because it has a decently sized shield capacity and it had the absorb bonus, which gives me a chance to absorb bullets as ammo. More importantly, it has the ammo regen while terrified anointment that paired with my Stormfront that applies terror to me on action skill end. These two, paired with my moderately sized magazine Brainstormer, meant that I spent little to no time having to reload, as long as I wasn't holding down the trigger for too long. Lastly, the class mod that I used was the Phaserker class mod, because the ability on this is just all around fantastic for most Amara builds. It comes with helpful bonuses in the added weapon damage and action skill cooldown rate. For alternative options, if you don't have this or just don't simply want to use this, the Elementalist could be useful if you have really good rolls on the bonuses, and also the new driver mod from the raid works really well from what I've tested so far. And that, my friends, is going to wrap it up for my ThunderFrost Amara build. If you like this build, please leave me a like on the video. If you have any questions on the build, please do not hesitate to drop me a comment below and I'll reply because I read and reply to every single comment on my videos. If you're on PS4 and would like to try this build but you're missing pieces of it or just a single piece of it, let me know and I'll get you situated as fast as I can. For my PC and Xbox viewers, just leave a comment below if you're in need of a piece of this build and I'm positive that someone reading it will be willing to help you out happily. Everyone, please make sure to TD or check that subscribe button to support me, and if you don't want to miss out on future content from me, also TD or check that notification bell. Don't forget to check out the video description for links to my other build videos, and I also put a link for all the items that I'm giving away on PS4 down there too. Just message me any item that you want from that list that you'd like and I'll send it to you. If you're on PS4 and would like to raid with me, send me your friend request with raids somewhere in the message and I'll keep you in mind for when I'm inviting people to join me. And that's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching to the end. I'll check you all in the next video. See ya!
Opposites attracted, magnetic and irreplaceable. Picture perfect, photogenic, doubts diminish. Yes, I'm finished acting like nobody has my back. Girl, you told me that I'ma keep you steady on your path, so I'm knowing.